Masechet Eruvin, Daf Kaftet 29. Today we are dealing with the minimum amounts of different foods that you can use to make an eruv. Generally, an eruv has to be 2 meals worth of food. So the foods we're going to be dealing with is first apples, then onions, and then beer, and then dates. So we'll start with the apples, and we start with a fun story. Amar Rava Hereni keben azai b'shuke teveria. So Rava one day he felt confident and in a good mood, and so he got up in the middle of Tiberia and said, "Anyone can come ask me a question." Just like Ben Azai would do so in Tiberias, he would challenge anyone to ask him a question. He would answer on the spot. There's actually a similarity. Some Greco-Roman popular speakers would come and ask people to come and propose a topic, and then they would give a whole speech about that topic. So some rabbis wanted to rise to that occasion. There were other sages, however, that said one should not do this, but rather one should prepare his lesson well and not speak extemporaneously. But in any case, Rava in this wanted to field any questions. So someone asked, can you make an eruv with apples? And Rava answered, can you make an eruv? The question was, how much? How many apples do you need to make an eruv? And he answered, can you make an eruv with apples at all? That's a bit strange because apples are food. So why did he think that one cannot make an eruv with apples? Various possibilities, perhaps because apples are considered a dessert and not a food, or maybe they're talking about some kind of wild apples that are not generally in, or maybe he really did think that apples are edible, but he wanted to throw the challenge back to the student. All right, in any case, the Gemara next proves that apples can be used for an eruv. Says Velo, why can't they be used? Ve'hatenan, kol ha'ochalin mistarfin lifsol et ha'givya behasi peras, umazon shetes seudot la'eruv, vechabesa litame tumat ochalin. And so now we can prove that apples can be used for an eruv because there's a Mishnah in Masechet Me'ilah that says all foods can join together to, if someone is, if a kohen is eats a lot of tum'ah food, then he becomes disqualified in his body from eating tirumah, and he has to go to mikveh. How much is that? A half of a peras. Okay, and mezon shetes seudot la'eruv, all foods join together to make up an eruv. In other words, you can use many different kinds of foods and set that aside as the meal for the eruv. And any foods can join together to make up an egg's worth, in order that at egg's worth, if it's tameh, a food can make other food tameh. So the point here is that, you see, this Mishnah says all foods you can use to make an eruv, including, we should presume, apples. So why did Rava say that apples are not good? So this seems to challenge Rava and refute him. However, hold on, is that really a refutation? This is not really refutation because we saw earlier that Rabbi Yochanan made a rule about rules. His rule about rules is that every rule has exceptions. And so we don't learn from a general formulation. So even though this Mishnah said all food can join together, but it could have exceptions, and maybe apples are not included in that. So it's not necessarily a proof. So we'll analyze a little more to bring a proof. Ela mishum dekatane ubimezon shete seudot la'eruv vechabesa letame tumat ochalin v'hanename benet timuye tumat ochalin ninhu. So since the Mishnah mentioned that the same foods can join together both for an eruv and for a kabetza, to make other food tameh, well, apples obviously are included in the last category because that many apples, if they're tameh, make other food tameh. So therefore, they would be have to be included in eruv as well. And so now we've proven from this Mishnah that apples can be used for an eruv. And so Rava, perhaps he was perhaps it was a bit overconfident in answering all questions on the spot, because whatever his thinking was, we proved now that apples can be used for an eruv. So now back to that student's question. Bechama, how many apples do you need in order to make an eruv? It has to be 2 meals worth. So how much is that? Amar Rav Nachman, tapuchim bekav. Kav, that's a little more than a liter of volume measure. And so that's how much you need. So a significant number of apples. All right, now we challenge this. Metibe from a Baraita. Rabbi Shimon ben Azar Omer, ukla tablin. This Baraita is going to list various items and the minimum amount that you have to give to a poor person on the 3rd and 6th year of the Shivi'it cycle. You give a tenth of your produce to poor people. And when you distribute it, you should give each person a nice amount. Don't just give like one peanut to each poor person, right? Give them something significant. So how much is that? So for spices, it's an ukla, whatever that measurement is, an eighth of a log. Litya yarak. For vegetables, a liter of vegetables. Asara egozin. Nuts, 10 nuts. Chamisha afarkesin. 5 peaches. Sheneri monim. 2 pomegranates. Etrog ehad. Right, 1 etrog. Those are worthy amounts. Okay, that's all the Braita. Amar Gursak bar dare mishmeh de Rab Menashia bar segub le, unusual name of a sage, mishmeh de Rab, but he said all this in the name of Rav, vechen la eruv, that these measurements that we said are the minimum amount that you should give to poor people are the same measurements for an eruv. In other words, this would be considered 2 meals worth. And so there you go. Now, apples seem to be similar to peaches. And we said here 5 peaches, and that's less than a kav worth of peaches. So now we have a contradiction. Which one is it? A kav that we said before, or 5? And we answer, hane chashive, hane la chashive. So peaches are significant, and therefore 5 peaches is enough to make a meal. But apples are less important, and that's why you need more apples. So we all know that you can't compare apples and oranges, but now this stuff, and we learned in Daf Yomi that you also cannot compare apples and peaches. Okay, good to know. All right, Amar Rav Yosef. Now we're going to just discuss this statement here by this Gursak, who said in the name of Rav. Rav Yosef says to him, Share about him, Shere leh mare le Rab Menashia bar segub leh. May God forgive that sage, because he said something that was an error. Ana amrita nihale amatnitin vehu amara abariata. That statement that Rav said, the words vechen la eruvin, it's also the same. We apply the same measurements for an eruv. He said that regarding a baraita. However, I know that Rav said it regarding a Mishnah. So what is the Mishnah that he said it on? We'll discuss what the difference is between them. Titnan en pochatin le'ani begoren. This is a Mishnah in Masechet Pe'ah, also talking about the ma'aseh that you give to an ani. So when he comes to the threshing floor to get sustenance, we have to give him a minimum amount. We don't give him less than chasi kav chitin for wheat, half of a kav. Kav seorin barley, which is less important. You have to give him a full kav. Rabbi Meir omer chatzi kav seorin. Rabbi Meir says only half. Bekav bechasi kusmin, and for spelt kav and a half. Bekav gerot, and for dried figs a kav. We're going to use this later at the end of this stuff to compare it to dates, so we can remember that. Or maneh devela, or if it's pressed figs, then it would be a maneh amount. Rabbi Akiva omer peras, no, half of that. Bechasi log yain. Okay, so this is important. So half of a log of yain. Rabbi Akiva omer revi'it, no, a quarter of a log. Or revi'it shemen, Rabbi Akiva sheminit. So for oil, the Tanakama says a quarter of a log. Rabbi Akiva says an eighth of it. Ushar kol perot. Amar Bar Shaul, Kedeshim Kerem Vikach Behem Mezon Shete Seudot. All other fruit, enough that if you sell the fruit, you could buy 2 meals. Okay, that's the whole Mishnah. And about that, Amar Rav Vechen La'eruv. And Rav says, this minimal amount that you give to a poor person happens to be the same as 2 meals worth, and therefore is the same amount that you would make for an eruv. So Rav Yosef was upset that this statement was applied to a baraita. He says, no, it should be applied to the Mishnah. Now, actually, there's no not necessarily any contradiction between the Braita and the Mishnah. So really, you could apply them to this one or that one. So that's why the Gemara asks next. Umay ulmeh dehai mehach. Well, how is this one better than that one? Right? Why is it better to apply Rav's statement that he said, make sure that you know that he said it about the Mishnah rather than the Braita? Perhaps it's because this Baraita mentioned spices. Spices are not edible. They are something that you would want to give. It's nice to give it to a poor person and he'll use them, but you can't use it for an eruv because an eruv has to be something that is presently edible, not something that you just add to another food. So if that's the problem and you didn't want, in this case, Rav's statement cannot apply to all of the items in the Baraita because it can't apply to spices. Well, that doesn't really matter because in the Mishnah mentions wheat, which means raw wheat, and that is not edible either. So, so the Mishnah in that sense is not any better. Mishnah also includes items that cannot be used for an eruv. So Rav's statement is not talking about all the items in either the Baraita or the Mishnah. Right here also has barley and wheat and barley, which are not food. So it must be because this Baraita, this Mishnah mentions a half of a log of yain. Half of a log is 2 divi'its, right? Whenever we say kiddush or anything, or for the 4 cups of wine, you want to have like 3 ounces, right? So that's a quarter. That's a divi'it log. But in this Mishnah, and that's in fact Rabbi Akiva's opinion. But in this Mishnah, it says half of a log, which is a bigger amount than we're used to. And Rav said in a different place, and he in fact does say that you need 2 divi'its of yain, which is the same as half of a log. So since we see that Rav requires so much, right, double what we might have otherwise thought, needs 2 revi'its, and the Mishnah says 2 revi'its also, which is the amount that you give to a poor person. So it makes sense that Rav would be the one that said Rav said on the Mishnah, v'chen la'eruv, right? And that would be a significant thing to say. So that's why Rav Yosef wanted to correct that and make sure that you know that the Mishnah is, that Rav Yosef agrees that everything in the Mishnah is the amount that's the same for making an eruv. Okay, now that we established that, let's just go back and examine some of those statements in the Mishnah. Amar mor mezon shete seudot la'eruv. Sabar Rav lememar adika seuda mehai usuda mehai. So when you said that you require that the eruv have amount of food for 2 meals, Rav Yosef at first thought that meant you need, if you have, let's say you have, rice and potatoes. So you need enough rice for 1 meal and enough potatoes for 1 meal, right? That's what he thought. You need that, full amount of each item for a whole meal. Says, no, not necessarily. Even if you have a third, a quarter, right? Even if you have a lot of different things and just have a small amount, as long as all together you add up all the different items you have to 2 meals, that's fine. Okay, now let's go back and examine what I've said. Gufa amar Rav me'arbin b'shte reviyot shel yain. All right, so you need 2 revi'its of yain if that's going to be what you use for an eruv. Really? Do you need that much? We have a challenge from a Braita. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar omer yain kedei lechol bo, chometz kedei letabel bo, zetim salim kedei lechol bahen shete seudot. If you include wine with your eruv, it should be enough to eat with it. So this is assuming that we're using the wine as a dip. Together with bread and other things. So too with vinegar, enough to dip it. Olives and onions, enough to eat them as a side dish together with whatever meal you have. So that's the amount of wine you would need. And so this amount of wine is much less. So this challenges Rav, who said you need a lot more wine. And so we answer simply, Hatam bechamra mevashla. That's talking about cooked wine. Cooked wine is very strong. You cook it in order to make it strong to be used as a dip or as a dressing. So that's what it's talking about when it's used as a side dish. But Rav was talking about when that's the main part of the meal that you are drinking the wine itself. So that resolves that contradiction. Okay, now quoting back something said in the Baraita, Amad Mor, Chometz Kedela Tabelbo, well, just now we said enough vinegar to dip. Amad Rav Gidel Amarav, Kedela Tabelbo Mazon Sheteshu Seudot Shel Yarak. One version of the statement assumes that you're having only salad for the whole meal. And so you need enough vinegar to provide dressing for the salad, and that's the whole meal. So that would be a lot more. However, another version, this assumes that the vegetables are a side dish, and so this would mean a lesser amount of vinegar just as a dip for the side dish of vegetables. Okay, good. Now, Amar Mor zetim besalim. That Baraita also mentioned you can have olives and onions, and include that as part of the things that you have put into the eruv as a side dish. And it will be enough for 2 meals. Now, hold on, we're going to have an analysis of onions. Can you make an eruv with onions? רבי מאיר בארדיסקה, ובא אדם אחד לפניו, אמר לו רבי, ערבתי בבשלים לטבעין. So there was this man from this city, and he wanted to go, so he was staying in this city, and he wanted to go to this city, Tiv'on, and it's too far to go to walk from the city, through the city limits. And so he made an eruv in between, and he told Rabbi, so Rabbi Meir was there. So this person came to Rabbi Meir and told him, Rabbi, I made an eruv with onions, and so that I can get to that city. And Rabbi Meir said, you made an eruv, this is eruv techumin, to get from one place to the other beyond the 2,000 amot. He said, you did it with onions? Onions are no good. Your eruv, your meal is worthless. And therefore, because he was already in the middle, he already left one city, and now he's stuck there, he says, you have to stay within 4 amot. You can't walk around. You got to stay here till Shabbat is over. Because if one does leave the eruv, if one does leave the techum, and he doesn't have an eruv techumin, then he's stuck there. So he learned the hard way not to make an eruv with onions. All right. So now we have a contradiction, because that Baraita said you can use onions, and now according to this story, you can't use onions. So we're going to resolve it. When it says you cannot do it, that's talking about with the leaves. Leaves are very dangerous, very harmful. But the bulbs of the onions, that's fine. That's what the Baraita was talking about. And we know that the Tanya, if someone eats an onion, I'm talking about the leaves, and he dies the next morning, you don't have to wonder what he died from. He must have eaten the leaves of an onion. Shmuel was known for his medical expertise. And he said, it's only talking about the leaves, but not the bulbs. And even the leaves are not bad if they grew the span of zeret. That's this much. It's half an amah from the thumb to the pinky outspread. If it grew already that much, then they're not dangerous anymore. Only when it's small, I guess it's really compact and dense, so there it is dangerous. And it's furthermore only if you didn't drink beer. But having a little beer with it, then that removes the problem of eating the onion leaves. Okay, so they are dangerous, but only a certain small in a few cases. Here's some background that tries to figure out which actual oils that are in it that could be toxic in high concentrations to some people. All right, and so one more statement about that. One should not eat an onion because literally the snake that's in it. There's not talking about actual snakes in the onions, but rather like as if venom of a snake. In other words, there's poisonous things in the onion. And one time Rabbi Chanina ate a half of an onion and half of the snake that's in it. This reminds me of what's worse than finding a snake in your onion, right? A half a snake. Okay, but he doesn't mean here literally that he ate the snake, but rather that he ate half of the toxins that were in the snake. Behalav and atalamut, and he was sick and he almost died. And his colleagues prayed for him, and he got better because his generation needed him. He was a very important person. He was very righteous. His teachings, his merit, and so. But otherwise, if if it was someone else or a different time, then he would not have made it. Okay, so therefore we see that although onions can be dangerous if eaten in certain ways in certain concentrations, but if you have the bulb and so on, if you have it with beer and if you wait till it grows, then it's not dangerous. And in those cases, you can use an onion for the eruv. Okay, so we dealt with apples and onions, and now we're still going to deal with beer and dates. Rabbi Zera said two things about beer. We'll deal with the second one first. He said, first of all, you can use it for an eruv, and if you're filling up a mikveh needs 40 se'ah. And once you fill it with 40 se'ah, then you can put other water in it, 40 se'ah of rainwater, then other water, drawn water, you can add to it, it's fine. But the first 40 se'ah have to be rainwater. Now, if you add beer, right, somehow while you're filling it up, before it gets to 40, if a little bit of beer falls in, it's okay. But 3 lug of beer, that would make it no good. That mikveh would not be good. Actually, any drawn water, 3 lugin of any drawn water would nullify the mikveh, and you wouldn't get up to. You need 40 rainwater and not anything else. The chidush here is that other liquids that are not water-based, you can add to it, you can put in, and although it will not contribute to the 40 se'ah, it's not considered drawn water because it's not water. The chidush here is that beer is considered water, and it's like drawn water, and therefore 3 log of beer is no good. Okay, so regarding the second halacha, we're going to get to the eruv part. This is, of course, what's the difference between beer and colored water, right? I mean, colored water, also, maybe you would think it's not quite water, but colored water is water, and 3 log of colored water also makes it, nullifies the mikveh if you're filling it up. This should be the same thing. Okay, that's talking about colored water, and we know what colored water is. It's some water with some kind of dye in it, but that's not necessarily beer. Beer is different, and so that he had to say that beer is considered a water-based substance, and so that's drawn water, and so don't put that in the mikveh. I don't know why you would, but if it fell in for some reason, then the mikveh is no good. You got to refill it. Okay, so that's regarding mikveh. Now going back to the beer, using beer as an eruv, right? That's going to be my meal. I'm putting it outside the city, 2,000 amot, so then I can get there and I'll drink the beer, and then I can travel farther. So how much beer do I have to put? So Rav Yosef thought that this should be 2 quarters. He says 2 quarters. It's not really clear 2 quarters of what. Some interpret this to be 2 quarters of a kav, which is much bigger. Others at 2 quarters of a log. I'm just going to go by that second one. Seems simpler. So he says 2 quarters of a log. In other words, half of a log. That's how much beer, which would be a significant amount. Okay. Kiditnan. I mean, it's not really that much, but okay, that's how much he said. But we're going to disprove it. The Kiditnan, Mosi, Yayin, Kedem Mezigat Kos. Now, where did he get this from? Let's prove first of all where he got it from, and then we'll disprove it. So this is a Mishnah that we learned back in Shabbat. If you're carrying, how much is minimal amounts that you need to carry in order to be chayav? You can't carry anything at all, but it has to be a significant amount for the person to be chayav to bring a korban chatat. So hamasi yayin kedem mezigat kos. If you carry wine in the Shut Rabim on Shabbat, the minimal amount, in order to be punished, is enough to mix with water to make a cup full. That's the Mishnah. Vetani Allah, and we said about that, kedem mizigat kos yafeh, not just to mix any cup, but nice cup, right? Enough to, like you want to make kiddush on. Well, my kos yafeh, kos shel beracha, you're going to say beracha about it, with it. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Abba Bar Abu, kos shel beracha, tzarich sheyeh bo rova revi'it. So if you want to make a nice cup full of wine, you need a quarter of a log. In other words, you need that much, and then you add more water to it. Rava said you always need a 3-to-1 ratio, 3 parts water, 1 part wine. And therefore, the minimum amount of wine that is considered significant is a quarter of a log. Okay, good. So now that we know that, keep that in mind. A quarter of a log is a significant amount of wine. Now the end of the Mishnah said, other liquids are revi'it. So other liquids are revi'it. Wine is a quarter of that, right? Is a 16th. Let's say revi'it is 3 ounces, and so wine is less than an ounce. That's the minimum amount for carrying. Now, beer is included in these other mixtures, right? So carrying beer, the minimum amount for carrying beer would be a revi'it. Now, since we know that for wine, right, we said before that the minimum amount for wine is right. The minimum amount of wine is, for carrying is a quarter of revi'it. But the minimum amount of wine for making an eruv is, according to Rav, is 2 revi'its, right? So that's for 8 times more. And so if we use the same ratio for beer, so the minimal amount for carrying beer is a revi'it, and therefore, with the same ratio, 8 times that you would need in order to for the eruv, and that would be 2 log, right? 2 log, and so there you go. So that's what he thought, that you would need 2 log full of beer in order to make a revi'it, which would be quite a lot of beer, and so that's what he was thinking. And however, the Gemara rejects that. Regarding Shabbat, we had a different calculation. For Shabbat, for carrying Shabbat, we need something that's a significant amount. So even a little bit of wine is a significant amount because you dilute it. And for beer, it's more because you don't dilute it. However, regarding eruv, it's how much you would generally drink as in a meal or as a meal. And there are people who drink a cup of beer in the morning and a cup in the afternoon, and it's filling and it satisfies them. And so therefore, all you need is a revi'it, and a revi'it, which is just be the right 2/4 of a log, half of a log, and that would be enough, and not 2 logs. So it depends on, right, the criteria for carrying on Shabbat is what's considered important. The criteria for an eruv is how much people generally drink. And so therefore that we resolve to that. And now we get to the last item on the list, which is dates. Tamarim bekhama. How many dates do you need? Amar of Yosef tamarim bekav. Right, so you need a kav of dates. That's how much. Amar of Yosef, mina amin alai. Now he wants to prove it. How do I know that it's a kav of dates? Remember, back up there, we said figs is also a kav. So we're going to learn it from figs. If someone had teruma, figs of teruma, so it's supposed to give it to a kohen, but he didn't realize that they're teruma. He ate them himself. Now he has to pay back the kohen. He can pay in figs, obviously, but let's say he doesn't have any more figs. He wants to pay the kohen in dates. So he can. And not only that, it's even better. Dates are better than figs. And so we say, tavo alav beracha. Okay, so we see that since dates are better than figs, and figs, the amount is a kav, so dates also, the amount would be not less than a kav, right? Or a kav would be, in other words, not a kav would be, or not more than a kav would be sufficient. All right. Now, hechi dameh, we're going to just prove this further. Hechi dameh, ilema lefi damim. Now, if you say this is talking about the monetary worth, I'd say, I supposed to give the Kohen $10 worth of figs that belong to the Kohen, and I ate them. So if I say I give $10 worth of dates, right? Then why should he get a special blessing? I gave him $10 worth of this and $10 worth of that. I didn't give him anything extra. I fulfilled my minimal responsibility. So that doesn't make sense. Bezuzah achal. Bezuzah kameshalem. Ela lav lefi midah. Right? It must be talking about according to the measurement. תאכל מן גריבה דגרוגרות שווה זוזה, וכמה שלם לגריבה דתמרים דשווה 4. No, it must be I ate a certain a se'ah worth of dried figs, that was worth 1 zuz, and then I paid the same volume worth of dates, and that's worth 4 times. So that's why v'kataneh tavo leberacha alma timarim adife. And so we can prove from this that that dates are superior to figs, because, right, you wouldn't say tavo leberacha if it was just the same thing, but we see from measure to measure, right, pound for pound, dates are better. And so therefore, if you need a kav is the minimum amount you need for dates in order to make an eruv, you would not need any more figs. Figs is a kav is the minimum amount. Then for dates, that would also be sufficient. All right, so that would be the proof, but we end with a disproof. Amar le Abaye, no, it could be that it's money for money, right? It's $10 worth of figs, and I pay back with $10 worth of dates. And the question you asked was, why should he get a blessing? Just he paid back the same amount. The difference is because he ate something that buyers are not eager to buy, but he paid back something that buyers are eager to buy. In other words, dates are harder to come by, and so even though the same value, right, it's easier to sell. Kind of like, if you 200 bicycles are the same price as 1 Porsche, but still easier to sell 1 Porsche than 200 bicycles. And so therefore, we still give him a blessing. And therefore, we don't necessarily know that the dates are more valuable or not. And so we end without an absolute proof for the amount of dates. And that's the last item for today. And so we saw all these different foods, the minimum amount, but the basic rule is that it's enough for 2 meals. Baruch Adonai Olam, Amen v'Amen.